Flow, The Psychology of the Optimal Experience by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Read by Ugo Agoruah. Chapter 2, The Anatomy of Consciousness, Part 1. At certain times in history, cultures have taken it for granted that a person wasn't fully human unless he or she learned to master thought and feelings. In Confucius China, in ancient Sparta, in Republican Rome, in the early pilgrim settlements of New England, and among the British upper classes of the Victorian era, people were held responsible for keeping a tight rein on their emotions. Anyone who indulged in self-pity, who let instinct rather than reflection dictate actions, forfeited the right to be accepted as a member of the community. In other historical periods, such as the one which we are living now, the ability to control oneself is not held in high esteem. People who attempt it are thought to be faintly ridiculous, uptight, or not quite with it. But whatever the dictates of fashion, it seems that those who take the trouble to gain mastery over what happens in consciousness do live a happier life. To achieve such mastery, it is obviously important to understand how consciousness works. In the present chapter, we shall take a step in that direction. To begin with, and just to clear the air of any suspicion that in talking about consciousness, we are referring to some mysterious process, we should recognize that, like every other dimension of human behavior, it is the result of biological processes. It exists only because of the incredibly complex architecture of our nervous system, which in turn is built up according to instructions contained in the protein molecules of our chromosomes. At the same time, we should recognize that the way in which consciousness works is not entirely controlled by its biological programming. In many important respects that we shall review in the pages that follow, it is self-directed. In other words, consciousness has developed the ability to override its genetic instructions and to set its own independent course of action. The function of consciousness is to represent information about what is happening outside and inside the organism in such a way that it can be evaluated and acted upon by the body. In this sense, it functions as a clearinghouse for sensations, perceptions, feelings, and ideas, establishing priorities among all the diverse information. Without consciousness, we would still know what is going on, but we would have to react to it in a reflective, instinctive way. With consciousness, we can deliberately weigh what the senses tell us and respond accordingly. And we can invent information that did not exist before. It is because we have consciousness that we can daydream, make up lies, and write beautiful poems and scientific theories. Over the endless dark centuries of its evolution, the human nervous system has become so complex that it is now able to affect its own states, making it to a certain extent fully independent of its genetic blueprint and of the objective environment. A person can make himself happy or miserable, regardless of what is actually happening outside, just by changing the contents of consciousness. We all know individuals who can transform hopeless situations into challenges to be overcome, just through the force of their personalities. This ability to persevere, despite obstacles and setbacks, is the quality people most admire in others, and justly so. It is probably the most important trait, not only for succeeding in life, but for enjoying it as well. To develop this trait, one must find ways to order consciousness so as to be in control of feelings and thoughts. It is best not to expect that shortcuts will do the trick. Some people have a tendency to become very mystical when talking about consciousness, and expect it to accomplish miracles that at present it is not designed to perform. They would like to believe that anything is possible in what they think of as the spiritual realm. Other individuals claim the power to channel it into past experiences, to communicate with spiritual entities, and to perform uncanny feats of extrasensory perception. When not outright fraud, these accounts usually turn out to be self-delusions, lies that an overly receptive mind tells itself. The remarkable accomplishments of Hindu fakirs and other practitioners of mental disciplines are often presented as examples of the unlimited powers of the mind, and with more justification. But even many of these claims do not hold up under investigation, and the ones that do can be explained in terms of the extremely specialized training of a normal mind. After all, mystical explanations are not necessary to account for the performance of a great violinist or a great athlete, or even though most of us could not even begin to approach their power. The yogi, similarly, is a virtuoso of the control of consciousness. Like all virtuosi, he must spend many years learning. He must keep constantly in training. Being a specialist, he cannot afford the time or the mental energy to do anything other than to fine-tune his skills at manipulating his inner experiences. The skills the yogi gains are at the expense of the more mundane abilities that other people learn to develop and take for granted. What an individual yogi can do is amazing, but so is what a plumber can do, or a good mechanic. Perhaps in time we shall discover hidden powers of the mind that will allow it to make the sort of quantum leaps that now we can only dream about. There is no reason to rule out the possibility that eventually we shall be able to bend spoons with brain waves. But at this point, when there are so many more mundane but no less urgent tasks to accomplish, it seems a waste of time to lust for powers beyond our reach when consciousness, with all its limitations, could be employed so much more effectively. Although in its present state, it cannot do what some people would wish it to do, the mind has enormous untapped potential that we desperately need to learn how to use. Because no branch of science deals with consciousness directly, there is no single accepted description of how it works. Many disciplines touch on it and thus provide peripheral accounts. Neuroscience, neuroanatomy, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, psychoanalysis, and phenomenology are some of the most directly relevant fields to choose from. However, trying to summarize their findings would result in an account similar to the descriptions the blind men gave to the elephant, each different and each unrelating to the other. No doubt we shall continue to learn important things about consciousness from these disciplines, but in the meantime, we are left with the task of providing a model that is grounded in fact, yet expressed simply enough so that anyone can make use of it. Although it sounds like indecipherable academic jargon, the most concise description of the approach, I believe, to be the clearest way to examine the main facets of what happens in the mind in a way that can be useful in the actual practice of everyday life, is a phenomenological model of consciousness based on information theory. This representation of consciousness is phenomenological in that it deals directly with events, phenomena, as we experience and interpret them, rather than focusing on anatomical structures, neurochemical processes, or unconscious purposes that make these events possible. Of course, it is understood that whatever happens in the mind is the result of electrochemical changes in the nervous system, as laid down over millions of years by biological evolution. But phenomenology assumes that a mental event can be best understood if we look at it directly as it was experienced, rather than through the specialized optics of a particular discipline. Yet in contrast to pure phenomenology, which intentionally excludes any other theory or science from its method, The model we will explore here adopts principles from information theory as being relevant for understanding what happens in consciousness. These principles include knowledge about how sensory data are processed, stored, and used, the dynamics of attention and memory. With this framework in mind, what then does it mean to be conscious? It simply means that certain specific conscious events, sensations, feelings, thoughts, and intention, are occurring and that we are able to direct their course. In contrast, when we are dreaming, some of the same events are present, yet we are not conscious because we cannot control them. For instance, I may dream of having received news of a relative's being involved in an accident, and I may feel very upset. I might think, I wish I could help them. Despite the fact that I perceive, feel, think, and form intentions in the dream, I cannot act on these processes by making provisions for checking out the truthfulness of the news, for example. And hence, I am not conscious. In dreams, we are locked into single scenarios we cannot change at will. The events that constitute consciousness, the things we see, feel, think, and desire, are information that we can manipulate and use. Thus, we might think of consciousness as intentionally ordered information. This dry definition, accurate as it is, does not fully suggest the importance of what it conveys, since for us, outside events do not exist unless we are aware of them. Consciousness corresponds to subjectively experienced reality. While everything we feel, smell, hear, or remember is potentially a candidate for entering consciousness, the experiences that actually do become part of it are much fewer than those left out. Thus, while consciousness is a mirror that reflects what our senses tell us about what happens both outside our bodies and within the nervous system, it reflects those changes selectively, actively shaping events, imposing on them a reality of its own. The reflection of consciousness provides what is called our life, the sum of all we have heard, seen, felt, hoped, and suffered from birth to death. Although we believe that there are things outside consciousness, we have direct evidence only of those that find a place in it. As a central clearinghouse in which varied events processed by different senses can be represented and compared, consciousness can contain a famine in Africa, the smell of a rose, the performance of the Dow Jones, and a plan to stop at the store to buy some bread, all at the same time. But that does not mean that its content is a shapeless jumble. We may call intentions the force that keeps information and consciousness ordered. Intentions arise in consciousness whenever a person is aware of desiring something or wanting to accomplish something. Intentions are also bits of information, shaped either by biological needs or by internalized social goals. They act as magnetic fields, moving attention towards some object and away from others, keeping our mind focused on some stimuli in preference to others. We often call the manifestation of intentionality by other names, such as instinct, need, drive, or desire. But these are all explanatory terms, telling us why people behave in certain ways. Intention is a more neural and descriptive term. It doesn't say why a person wants to do a certain thing, but simply states that he does. For instance, whenever blood sugar levels drop below a critical point, we start feeling uneasy. We might feel irritable and sweaty and get stomach cramps. Because of genetically programmed instructions to restore the level of sugar in the blood, we might start thinking about food. We will look for food until we eat and are no longer hungry. In this instance, we could say that it was the hunger drive that organized the content of consciousness, forcing us to focus attention on food. But this is already an interpretation of the facts. No doubt chemically accurate, but phenomenologically irrelevant. The hungry person is not aware of the levels of sugar in his bloodstream. He knows only that there is a bit of information in his consciousness that he has learned to identify as hunger. Once the person is aware that he is hungry, he might very well form the intention of obtaining some food. If he does so, his behavior will be the same as if he was simply obeying a need or drive. But alternatively, he could disregard the pangs of hunger entirely. He might have some stronger opposite intentions, such as losing weight or wanting to save money, or fasting for religious reasons. Sometimes, as in the case of political protesters who wish to starve themselves to death, the intention of making an ideological statement might override genetic instruction, resulting in voluntary death. The intentions we either inherit or acquire, or organized in hierarchies of goals, which specify the order of precedence among them. For protesters, achieving a given political reform may be more important than anything else, life included. That one goal takes precedence over all others. Most people, however, adopt sensible goals based on the needs of their bodies, to live a long and healthy life, to have sex, to be well fed and comfortable, or on the desires implanted by social systems, to be good, to work hard, to spend as much time as possible, to live up to others' expectations. But there are enough exceptions in every culture to show the goals are quite flexible. Individuals who depart from the norms, heroes, saints, sages, artists and poets, as well as the madmen and criminals, look for different things in life than most others do. The existence of people like these show how consciousness can be ordered in terms of different goals and intentions. Each of us has this freedom to control our subjective reality.